Namaste. Sivananda Supatha Foundation, Bhimanipatnam, is devoted to take forward Sadguru Sivananda Murtiji's mission by publishing his speeches and writings and holding seminars, symposiums, and conferences on various themes relating to Sanatana Dharma, Bharat culture, and its history, besides socio-cultural and spiritual topics. In pursuance of the above objectives, we organized an international symposium on reconstructing the cultural history of Bharat at Integral Institute of Advanced Management, Visakhapatnam, on February 18th and 19th, inviting reputed scholars from Bharat and abroad to enlighten us on various themes relating to the problems and perspectives in writing Bharat cultural history on truthful and purposeful lines. The erudite presentations of these scholars are presented in this channel. Kindly subscribe and encourage us in our endeavor to promote Sanatana Dharma.
We have one distinguished professor from the University of Allahabad. So he has been writing for the past 20, 30 years about the colonial historiography and the Indian thought, in the Hindu view of history. So he is comparing these two things and he is doing a wonderful job. And he was very much prepared to come here, and his tickets were also booked. But it so happened that there was a marriage in his own family, so where he is supposed to stay. So he is in the middle of a marriage function now, yesterday and today, and he excused himself. He was very apologetic. But when I asked him, I didn't want to miss him, so I asked him to send his pre-recorded talk on this issue. So he had with difficulties because he is of age and he is not able to do with the technology, the modern technology, but still he took the help of somebody else. So the video may not be of that quality, but at least audio may be clear to some extent, and we shall have his talk in the first place of this morning's program.
I am grateful to Professor Sudarshan Rao, former chairman of the ICHR, to the Shraddhe Guruji, Sivananda Supatha Foundation, respected Dr. K. Sivananda Murti, Chief Patron of the Foundation, to give me this opportunity to present a paper on this all-important seminar on the paradigm shift in the cultural historiography of Bharat. Thanks to Sri N. Radha Kumari ji, because on his insistence and regular reminders, I was able to at least do this much. I would like to present what I would like to call a rather loose collage of ideas which I can improve upon, modify after the questions and comments from this August gathering. Before I proceed, I would like to make a very small statement. According to what I have studied and taught in the University of Allahabad History Department for more than 40 years, is my statement that, truly speaking, Eurocentric history begins with Herodotus himself, considered to be the father of history in the Western world. While discussing the wars between Greeks and Persians, he also talks about the domination of a vast area of the civilized world. He even talks about barbarian hordes, which too needs some clarification and explanation. Secondly, I would like to add that during our religious sacrifices and special occasions, the priest still pronounces the sankalp or the religious vow, which is as good as this earliest statement of mine, as good as the preamble of the Constitution or prologues written in the books. With this, I begin with the definition of history, which according to me, and there has been a consensus over the years, that history is basically a study of human evolution. How the man has evolved through the stages is not only scientific in nature, but has logical deductive steps. The very first would be to discuss creation of the universe and the earth. Since man could not have evolved any language and or script so early, it was impossible to have any written records. Hence, every study or branch of knowledge recedes into a hoary past, which later on came to be called mythology. Thus, whether language or philosophy, history, sciences, literature, everything has emerged from mythology. And this is a statement given by Philip S. Miller in the introduction to the philosophy of history, which was edited by Simmons, etc. It is very nice work on philosophy of history and a very thin work. Therefore, another work which I would like to talk about at the very beginning is H.G. Wells, who had tried to analyze the evolution of the earth itself, rock foundation to mountains to lakes to oceans to rivers and everything, till the evolution of man as such. In fact, the basic features of primitive man-like ancestor, from apes to submen, which had started evolving from the above description, that is the Eocene age, considered to be 56.5 to 35.4 million years ago. And we can go for the encyclopedia to come to this conclusion. Thus, from the fish to amphibians to reptiles, the changes started occurring and are noticeable too. But the basic features till this period remained more or less the same. Maybe in their developing stage, whilst changes appear at the later age of the animal. These apes were bound to seek shelter behind rocks, because had they become cave dwellers, they would have left their traces, as we find at a later stage, when they must have learned to dwell in these caves by aping other animals. This was the later stage. Moreover, they had to learn swimming. It does not come to men naturally, instinctively and by birth. This fact points to their inhabiting the land and long separations from the rivers, ponds, lakes and seas where the life began. And this has been aptly summed up by H.G. Wells in his Outline of History in the very beginning chapters, the first part of the book. I have neither initiated this study nor I will be the last to study it. I was drawn to it by a sheer accident rather than by design. Initially, I had read Edward Pocock's India in Greece and tried to understand. This book is very important, where he is speaking about the people who inhabited the Western world, and this was published from London in the year 1854. We have tried to understand how a scholar like Pocock had used etymology, geography, philology, mythology, and history to bring out the fact that the names of all Greek mountains or lakes, ancient cities are not Greek derivatives. Rather, they are Sanskrit derivatives. Though he describes the then Indian or Aryan civilization flourishing in the region of northwestern India and Afghanistan, which was part of India then. Even the geographical locations are clearly marked in the accompanying maps. It is a wonderful book. Thus, as early as 1850s, we find scholars have realized that Indian civilization was the earliest. But since the revolution broke out in 1857, and it endangered the very existence of British colonial empire, and especially the horror of this jewel in the crown slipping away, they ensured that such studies were simply ignored, if not prescribed. This civilization, being not only one of the earliest, was in fact the only oldest surviving civilization. The eminent scholar and English scholar A.L. Basham has described it as a living civilization where one can find the recitation of the same Vedic hymns, richas, in daily prayers. And this he is writing not in Wonder That Was India. This is in the introduction to the work edited by him, The Cultural History of India, published by the Oxford University Press, 1984. Thus the tradition have continued. While researching for Kumbh and especially this fair at Prayag, I had stumbled upon material about the creation of universe and its control by the various forces. It was in this context that apart from Trinity of gods Brahma, Vishnu and Mahesh, we get reference of the planets and also the goddess as energy and its significance. How the geological changes affected the change of rivers and their course impacting the lives of the people, their customs, rituals, traditions for ages, and how the folk memory carries these changes through tales, events, fairs and socio-religious customs. In fact, the initial work, or what we may call pioneer geological work, was done by the famous geologist Professor Wadia, in whose memory is commemorated and preserved through the famous Wadia Institute at Dehradun. He had shown how the Himalayan system rose, and how river systems changed, leading to changes in river navigation and naturally settlement patterns, because these early civilizations were basically river valley civilizations. Once the river system changed, this shift in population had to be inevitable. And I'm referring to the shift in the river system in the sense that something did happen when the Saraswati went subterranean and Yamuna changed its course from being a western going river to becoming eastern flowing river. Earlier it had confluenced with the Saraswati, and now after this incident, some 1,000 years ago, it changed its course and it started confluencing with Ganga at Prayag. So this we have to keep in mind, the geological and the geographical shifting and changes that were taking place through the ages. Similarly, going through J.D. Rainier's book on Purpose and Method of History, during my studies and research, I came across a name, Gosse, G-O-S-S-E, and his researches on zoology and sea life. In fact, he was the pioneer of aquarium culture when he preserved fishes and other sea animals. And in 1857, 2 years before Charles Darwin's famous Origin of Species was published, Gosse had come forth with his most memorable work entitled Amphelus, an attempt to untie the geological knot, and became pioneer of what came to be prescribed as Amphelus hypothesis. His work was indeed the basis of the theory which attempted to resolve the raging contradictions of the earlier scholars regarding the age of earth and the God's words being propagated through prophets. Geologists like Charles Lyell, who believed that these occurred simultaneously as religious canons had asserted. But Gosse put forward his thesis that if one assumed creation ex nihilo, there would necessarily be traces of previous existence that had never actually occurred. Emphasis, by the way, is Greek for navel, N-A-V-E-L, navel, called Nabhi in Hindi or Sanskrit. And Gauss argued that the first man, Adam, did not require a navel because he was never born. Nevertheless, he must have had one, as do all complete human beings, just as God must have created trees with rings that never grow. Thus, Gauss argued that the fossil records, even coprolites, might also be evidence of life that had never actually existed, but which may have been instantly found by God at the moment of creation. And I think we have to go through this book, Edmund Gauss, Father and Son, edited by Michael Newton, Oxford University Press, 2004. So, if we go through all this, then we start realizing that this work, coming 2 years before the publication of Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, is a very important work which a historian like Rainier has tried to underline time and again. And he has emphasized the emphasis theory and suggested that learned men in the past ages had already given thought to the need of providing Adam with the navel, lest he be an imperfect human being. This is as per the Western tradition. Adam's navel, however, was not the trace of his fetal connection with the carnal mother, but of his connection with some unborn Lilith who lived in the Creator's mind only. I am repeating. With some unborn Lilith who lived in the Creator's mind only. I may point out that this entire theory is an imitation or exactly in consonance to the theory of Brahma, emerging from the navel of the Creator Preserver, Vishnu. One, when it says that there is not the trace of his connection with the carnal mother, and secondly, what the Hindu mythology underlines till this stage about the creation was just a mental affair. It was basically the Manas Srishti instead of the Mathematical Srishti, which came a bit later. So this Manas Srishti was what Gauss theory implies. While investigating further, I have trampled upon a very important piece of evidence, thanks to the Wikipedia, where there is a list of naval cities across the world. This, in fact, is a clinching evidence which goes to prove that ancient Indian wisdom and Sanatan knowledge or Hindu mythology has shreds of evidences across the globe. How else do we find so many cities have their names which are derivatives of the word naval in their respective languages? I wish to produce the piece which is quite revealing and self-explanatory in nature. Because belonging to Prayag and knowing from which Sanskrit root this word is derived, we all know it naturally is linked to the naval birth of Brahma. The term earth navel was applied to sacred locations from the ancient world. Generally, these sites were credited with the title following their development into a sacred or spatial place, thus as Delphi or Jerusalem. But in certain cases, the original name of the site contains a translation of the word navel. The ancient Peruvian capital, Cuzco, for example, literally means navel. The ancient word mythology of Cuzco, if you go through, you find that the city was located by the children of the sun, Survanshi, from Tiahuanaco, according to pre-designed rituals. through rituals this city came into being. There are several other locations around the ancient world. And if you look at it, these sites are invariably considered the center of the world or even the universe, and often become primary pilgrimage locations such as Prayag, Allahabad or Makkah. Because Cusco, as we find, is literally translated would mean navel. The capital of the Inca Empire was situated as Cusco, high in the Andes mountains. Tradition states the city was founded according to geometric principles. And what is Prayag at Allahabad? It is the altar of Brahma's sacrifice, the Chaturvedi. Easter Island was also called Te Pito O Te Henua. Instead of pronunciating, I would also like to give you the spelling. T-E-T hyphen Pito, P-I-T-O hyphen O hyphen T-E hyphen H-E-N-U-A, which when translated means the navel of the earth. Hancock suggested that its geographical location may have determined the original settlement. In fact, Jerusalem, as the capital of Holy Land, is also called Earth Navel. Therefore, the story is that the Cronus, the god of time, was driven to the depths of the universe by Zeus, it's in their tales, who forced him to vomit the stone which landed in the center of the earth. The current Omphalos is a replica of the original made in the Hellenistic period, not prior to that. Also, Eridu in Iraq is considered the original Sumerian mound of creation. Angkor Wat, the bayon in the network of temples at Angkor, was described by B. Grosslier as Omphalos in Angkor's stone cosmos. In Karnak in Egypt, an Omphalos was excavated in the sanctuary of the great temple of Amun at Karnak by G. A. Reasoner. It supports the Greek traditions of doves flying over Delphi and Karnak, etc., etc. Allahabad, formerly called Prayag and listed in the Mahabharata as the last and most important of the ancient holy places. It was considered to be the mythical creation of the universe. The chief cult shrines of Prayag stood on an island with the shrine to the primordial serpent which protected the eternal sea, seen by Huansang 644. A goddess shrine was recently found south of Allahabad that dates to 11,000 BC, along with Mesolithic cave paintings of a dancing shaman with headdress, bangles around the wrist, and a trident closely resembling Shiv. Allahabad is still the site of largest gathering of humanity on earth called the Kumbh. The axis mundi in certain beliefs and philosophies is the word center, or the connection between the earth and heaven. And that is why you find the spire of the church, or in all these temples or churches or mosques or pagodas, where they just symbolically try to define this navel. It is a connection between the people residing and their creator. So, if we go through the opinion of a very important scholar, Mircea Eliade, it says that every microcosm, every inhabited region has a center, that is to say, a place that is sacred above all. This work was translated by Philip Marriott, Symbolism of the Center in Images and Symbols, Princeton's 1991. So this work coming is trying to define why certain places are considered to be sacred and how these symbols represent the type of so in fact, what these people are now trying to do is post ipso facto defining things which they took from other earlier religion or faith and did not find an explanation in their own texts. So this theory of sacred places constituting word center or emphasis with the altar or place of prayer as the axis becomes all the more important and once more brings back our attention to Prayag or Allahabad. Because as spelled out in the ancient Sanatana scriptures, as we have already said, the basic name signifies altar. And the architecture of the sacred places often reflect this role. That is why I said every temple or palace and by extension every sacred city or royal residence is a sacred mountain, thus becoming a center. Now we have to discuss another important term which gives us an insight into the Sanatana and its belief, which seems to be too widespread and covered the entire civilized world. It seems to have given rise to similar terms in other new religio-cultural faiths and beliefs, despite their range from the Sanatana. The term which aroused this writer's quest for further inquiry was basil. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, basil was likely a native herb of India grown from its aromatic leaves. It is also called sweet basil and belongs to the family of mint, Lamicae. A further reading of the Wikipedia reveals that apart from mythological and religious significance, this plant, so universally revered, in such a great era, it is cherished as a sacred symbol of goddess Lakshmi in Hindu homes. Later, still in Christian resurrection legends, basil plant, Ocimum sanctum, is said to have sprung around the empty tomb of the Christ. Ultimately, the Sanatan belief continues but assumes a new form with the emergence of a new religious faith called Christianity, associated with Jesus and his resurrection. During the Greek domination, it was considered to sacrosanct, and much like the divine right theory of kingship, that the concept of divinity came to be associated with the royalty, and hence Basileus meant emperor in Greek, and basilica came to signify a royal sanctified hall. Later on, with the emergence of Christianity, and especially in the Greek and Eastern Orthodox churches, it came to be associated with churches too. In fact, that these churches placed pots of basil below the altar and used its leaves to sprinkle the holy water on followers gathered there. The French, drawing from Latin and Greek, call it la herbe royale, naturally signifying the Greek term, while in certain parts of Europe it is called Saint Joseph's wort. Similarly, the herb known for its aromatic properties was referred to as royal and or kingly plant and came to be called Basilican Pluton, possibly because it was believed to have been used in production of royal perfumes. This you can easily understand if you go through the etymology of basil given by Douglas Harper in the year 2018. It is as late as that. So, later still being associated with the church, it changes even the ecclesiastical usage, when only canonical laws could assign a basilica status to a church. Not all churches were basilica. So, the Basilica di San Nicola da Tolineto was reported to have been the first to be canonically created in 1783, a few years before the French Revolution. The 1917 Code of Canon Law officially recognized churches using the title of basilica from immemorial customs. Such churches are referred to as immemorial basilicas. Most of these immemorial churches are in Jerusalem and most of Israel. This concept naturally leads one to the importance of basil in the Sanatan tradition. Where else were the basil so revered traditionally apart from the Sanatan Hindu faith? A few words about basil and its symbolic tradition is imperative at this juncture to make things evident. We know, as mentioned above, that basil represents goddess Lakshmi symbolically. The next natural question would be, what does goddess Lakshmi represent? We have to visualize Vishnu, the creator preserver of the universe, in his Sarsaya form, where he lies on the serpent in the midst of the Shiv Sagar, with goddess Lakshmi at his feet. In fact, this signifies symbolically that Lord Vishnu is in deep meditation or Yog Nidra, which is nothing but inertia of rest. How can the inertia of rest be transformed into inertia of motion? It is very easy to understand. Naturally and scientifically, by the induction of energy. What does goddess Lakshmi signify? It signifies energy or Prakriti, which induces the Lord Vishnu to break his Yog Nidra. And what emerges due to induction of energy? It is the emergence of Brahma from the navel of Lord Vishnu, thanks to energy. This Brahma is the creation of mind, as we have already mentioned. Thus, for every prayer or occasion, the ritual of basil got associated, as it was the energy provider and became the symbol of sanctum sanctorum. Regarding the sanctum sanctorum too, we may add a few words. It was in the shape of an altar where Brahma is said to have made sacrificial offering at Prayag, and the name is derived from the Sanskrit root meaning Brahma's sacrificial altar. And this is a very common phenomenon which needs no further clarification. But the sacrificial altar becomes symbolic of sacrifices, and the basil being planted in the altar-shaped pot came to be called Tulsi Chora. This Tulsi Chora resembles the altar, and naturally it became symbolic of the transfusion of energy and making prayers sacrificial and sacred. Thus basil became the basis of religion and religious temples. With the emergence of newer creeds, cults and faiths, the symbolism of the Sanatan was duly adopted, although losing the exact meaning and still continuing with the symbolism. Adaptation, in fact, has been the basis of human evolution, and its custom, rituals being traced back to a common genesis. Thus, in the light of those, we can assert that ultimately this Tulsi Chora, which had taken its shape and form from the Brahma's altar, and became the basis for the construction of altars. It gave rise to naturally geometry and trigonometry, big and small for big occasion, and later for individual offerings and sacrifices, as the model of construction of sanctum sanctorum as well. The basic structures of temples, churches, synagogues, etc. all adopted this. With the emergence of newer creeds, sects, etc. That is why basilica in the Latin language came to be derived from the earlier Greek word basilica stoa, S-T-O-A. In Latin, it signified the meeting hall of the religious building. The function naturally was a sacrificial offering from time immemorial, that is Sanatan. The basilica signified royal divine, and stoa was an open-air portico. If the stoa was an open-air portico, why was it in an open-air portion of a religious structure is not too evident. It must have been used for altar, for sacrificial prayer or offerings, for sacrifices, yags, as we know, which naturally they gave up later, on after newer creeds and religion phase develops. Thus, architecturally speaking, a basilica typically had rectangular base that was split into aisles by column and covered by a roof. The immense central aisle came to be known as nave. Thus, the word nave itself reminds one of the concept of naval birth of the Brahma as well as the universe. And names of the naval cities also signifies the same. What other reason can be assigned for naming the cities meaning naval? If we try to trace the history of basilica or basilica, we come across some of the earliest, like Basilica Porcia in Rome, dated 184 BCE, not prior to that. And Basilica in Pompeii, dated second half of the 2nd century BCE. So, in fact, the Romans had come across the basilica in the Greek context and adopted it because it was so well suited for their legislative and commercial needs. When Alexander did invade India, his motivation, apart from imperialistic ambition, was also due to the instruction from his teacher Aristotle, who desired that the basic religious texts and those adept in unraveling their meanings be brought here. From and why, we all know. The answer is quite obvious. They had lost the text and now no one knew the language or script and most of all the meanings implicit in them. Thus we can underline that basilica or basilica was of Sanskrit origin and had everything to do with Tulsi. It is no surprise that the names of Greek cities, lakes, mountains and all are all Sanskrit derivatives rather than Greek, as etymologically analyzed by Edward Pocock. We find another very interesting association of the word basilica with the insect moth, but that is something very different. Regarding basil, we come across a very revealing fact in early Christian history. We find there was a great scholar who later ordained sainthood. He was named Saint Basil, and why naturally we can understand. Not only this aforementioned facts, it seems that once it was realized that Saint Basil had a point in trying to rid the faith of earlier beliefs and he was doing a great service to Christianity. He's trying to get rid of all the earlier faiths. And he's trying to, give a new coloring to a complete range from the past Sanatan tradition. One thing more before I would like to conclude is once man appeared as Homo sapiens, how he started communicating through speech, resulting in the development of local and regional dialects to the ultimate communication mode of the language. Thus, philology, etymology, linguistics, and epistemology all gathered momentum with the gradual passage of time. The early customs, rituals, etc. were passed from one generation to another through the vehicle of language. And I am quoting from Gordon Childe, the Pelican book, What Happened in History, 1941. So he says it is through the vehicle of language, and this is how traditions and their study too acquired the focus of attention. Thus the study of human evolution in its various stages acquired an all-encompassing nature. History became an umbrella study under which everything related to human development came to be studied to understand the various dimensions of the gradual growth. I would like to diverge a bit to understand how Indian Sanatan Hindu traditions have logically carried them in oral tradition before documenting it in religio-cultural literature. Parjitar, F.E. Parjitar naturally, the great scholar who had studied Puranas and through it he had tried to talk about the Kali age and the early dynasties. He had this insight and sagacity that analyzed that whatever literature was related to the priests had been preserved in the Vedic corpus or Vedic texts, and the rest, which was non-priestly, was documented in the Puranas. He, however, cautioned which Puranas could be relied upon, which were composed much later and were by nature of timeless, not so reliable. One more thing has always puzzled the mind of present author or the present presenter, and that is the account of water deluge recounted in all the scriptures of all major religious systems of the world. We can now talk about this deluge which has been referred to in the Supatha Brahma. There is another piece of information of our history after the Neanderthal man. I wish to quote. This is basically from Davies, an outline history of the world, edited by C.S.C. Blount, UOP, that is Oxford University Press, London, 1928. And I am referring to its 1981 edition. He writes, then about 25,000 years ago, a new type appeared. It originated in North Africa or Southern Asia, perhaps in lands now submerged beneath the waters of the Mediterranean Sea. Can this submergence of land and water be treated as the deluge mentioned in almost all religious accounts? Moreover, we do know that a great portion of Bharatvarsh too got submerged, maybe in the same geographical or geological upset. This land is now said to have moved away and is said to be located near the New Zealand, somewhere southeast of New Zealand. Thus, the Aryavart was this whole area of east of Indus, West Asia, Central Asia, portions of Africa as well as Gondwana. And we all know that the entire continents were unified and they came to be fragmented later on. And basically, the oceans came in between. One more thing before I finally conclude. We have to take into consideration the geological and geographical shifts, because we all know that there was a Mediterranean land for which the entire Jewish population claims the people who lost their land. And this entire Mediterranean region was very well inhabited or populated. And it was later how it sank, became a Mediterranean lake and converted itself into Mediterranean Sea. My last and humble submission is we should take into consideration the geographical and geological shifts through the ages, from the Sat Yuga to the Treta, to the Dwapar, to the Kali Yuga, to understand these changes in order to understand the shift in the Sanatan belief. Thank you.